Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. This is a special 10-day segment for me as I'm interviewing actors, actresses, directors, writers, production people involved in films that are being shown at the Garden State Film Festival, of which I've been so active. I love the film festival. It's an amazing entity. I'm 15 years old, catering to indie film. I'm an indie author, and I know what the world of indie means. It's a precious thing. We'll talk about that later. Um, to even make me even more excited than I am now, you can see the energy emanating from me. Is we're going to talk basketball with Michael Husain. Not only basketball, but I mean, stuff that I would have never in the waiting game, which is Michael's movie, I would have never thought about these issues that he talks, and we're going to talk about it regarding the ABA and things that haven't happened and should happen, and I can't believe some of these things. So this is it's so relevant to me, and of course I'm a basketball person. Uh, the NCAA is going on, and in Michael's honor, I never wear this because it's precious. I wore my 1996 NCAA Final Four. I went because it was in Meadowlands. And pretty good game, Kentucky
Yeah,
Syracuse. I forgot who Syracuse had. It was a long time. It was a long time ago, but that was
mm,
my anyway. So Michael, I'm so thrilled you're here, and you can talk about your background. I mean, some of the things you've
yeah,
done as a writer, a director, producer. I mean, you did stuff for ESPN. I love that 30 by 30 series that you've done, and I mean all of it. So this is great. I'm so thrilled you're here, and we've got some serious stuff to talk about. Then not so serious. So
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for
So
having me.
take it away. Take it away. My little intro's done, a little background, and then we'll jump in to the waiting game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Waiting Game is my latest film. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and uh, I really kind of got my start doing work with A&E for a series called American Justice back in the 90s. And uh, learned how to make documentaries. It is a craft, and it's sometimes you have more time to be able to devote to something. Sometimes you live less, and but I've been able to work with a lot of. I've had a lot of great opportunities. Really, I've been fortunate enough to work with VH1 and with the History Channel, A&E, and then ESPN and with ESPN had just a long relationship working on their Sports Century series for many years, and then you mentioned the 30 for 30 short on which was on a telethon that actually happened to save the Indiana Pacers. It was the year after the ABA NBA merger, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, and the the Pacers came in, and the very next summer they were 2 weeks away from shuttering their doors, and Nancy Leonard, who was the coach's wife and really the de facto general manager of the team, looked at it and said, well, maybe the only thing we can do is have a telethon. This is in the time of the Jerry Lewis telethon happening all the time, and and so they went on the local independent television station that carried some of their games. And for 16 hours, they had jugglers and magicians and the players and the coaches come on, and everybody trying to get people to buy season tickets. And after they were 10 minutes away from having to close down and go off the air, and they hit the number they needed to hit. The Indiana Pacers survived, and they're still around. And so that was a 30 for 30 short that I did,
That's great.
and,
What
a,
a
and a fun one.
short. My goodness. Wow.
And yeah, that a telethon could save a professional sports team, but it happened. Um, and and I've been making independent films for the last 4 or 5 years now. And The Waiting Game came about. I always kind of listen around for stories and things like this. And I met a guy, an attorney named Scott Tarter. I live in Indianapolis, He's here, and he started telling me about this not-for-profit that he and an eye doctor had formed called the Dropping Dimes Foundation. And they're like, "What is that?" He said, "Well, it helps struggling ABA players financially." And I thought, what does that mean? I mean, are these guys who had, made some poor financial decisions and you're just jumping in to help them? And he's like, no, 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 it's nothing like that. These are guys who didn't make much money to start with, and then through I mentioned when I was talking about the telethon, this combining of the ABA and the NBA. So for those who don't know, the ABA was a rival league to the NBA for 9 years, from 1967 to 1976. And in 1976, the ABA was almost out of money, and so the two leagues came together to combine. What that really meant was the NBA was going to take four ABA teams and bring them into the NBA. They still exist: the Pacers, which we've mentioned, the Denver Nuggets, the San Antonio Spurs, and the New Jersey Nets. And so that bringing together of the leagues, it's commonly called the merger, and it's an issue and a name and a word that we describe we go into quite a bit in the film, but it was a business deal, and one in which ABA players thought they had some benefits, including retirement, a pension, health care. It appears to be written that way, and yet flash forward 20, 30 years from the time that the two leagues combined, and guys are calling the NBA and saying, hey, how do I get my pension started?
Oh,
And
wow.
the NBA is saying, you don't have a pension.
Wow.
And that's the crux of these guys starting to struggle.
Wow.
So some ABA players did just fine. They either went on to the NBA, and did all right, or they had successful business careers afterwards. But others didn't. Others really struggled to the point where they were, and this is what the lawyer started telling me, that there are guys that were homeless, guys being evicted from
Ugh,
their apartments in their 70s or 80s.
ugh.
Guys who couldn't afford insulin, couldn't afford. There was a guy living in a trailer in Kentucky who was heating his home with a kerosene lamp in the middle of it. Obviously a complete fire hazard, and he was handicapped, and just some terrible things, that for anyone, and let alone the ABA, let alone these guys had been the elite athletes of their days. They had been Olympians. There are many ABA players that became Hall of Famers. Um, you could argue that the league was equal or better than the NBA in terms of um, talent and athleticism. And so when he said that this had happened, it was kind of stunning to me. I can remember I lived, I grew up about 70 miles from Indianapolis. So the Pacers had this little independent TV station that broadcast games sometimes. We could get a fuzzy signal where I lived. And so I remember the Pacers from that era, but it just seemed unfathomable that this could be happening. And so he said, now the good news is that we've been negotiating with the NBA. The Dropping Dimes Foundation, have been negotiating with the NBA for 13 to 14 months at that point. And he said, I think we're only about a month away from the NBA coming through with some kind of benefit or help for these guys. Well, wow, that is a great little story. It'll be a feel good story. It'll be a short film, 10 minutes. Can I follow the next 6 weeks with you? And he agreed, and we did. And then, unfortunately, a month came and went, nothing. The NBA says, it's just technicalities. We just got to have a couple of sign offs and some things, but it's going to happen. It's all good. Another month comes and goes, nothing. And so, this lawyer who I was just getting to know and seemed like a nice guy, and but like many lawyers, he didn't show a lot of emotion, and just was, pretty cautious and non-emotional. So after 3 months of this waiting, I could see some of that facade start to crack,
Hmm.
um, and he was getting frustrated, and he was seemed like he was maybe getting a little angry, and I didn't quite understand the depth of that at that point. Um, and then he told me that there was an ABA player in Indianapolis, a guy named Sam Smith. Um, Sam was not a star. Sam was just a solid player who played 5 years in the ABA, and had, um, after he stopped playing, he worked at the Ford Motor Company in Indianapolis, in a plant. That tells you what the kind of money they were not making in their career. His He probably was paid better at Ford, and he had a little bit of pension probably from Ford, if he worked enough years. I don't remember exactly how many years he worked, but um, Sam had, in the latter part of his life, called Dropping Dimes and said he needed some help for some funeral expenses for, a family member, and so Scott, this lawyer, got to know Sam a little bit. And because they were both local to Indianapolis, they started having lunches and just talking basketball. Uh, and at one of those lunches, Scott asks him, tell me about, where did you work? I worked at Ford. Oh, what part of Ford did you work on? He said, well, the plant on the east side of Indianapolis. And Scott says, "Well, that's very interesting. My own father worked at Ford, in the east side of Indianapolis at the plant in what is called English Avenue here." And and Sam looked at him and kind of rattled around his memory a little bit. He said, "Is your dad's name Bob?" And Scott Tarter says, "Yeah, that's my dad, Bob Tarter." And Sam said, "Well, hell, I was his supervisor for years." So only had they met through only through Dropping Dimes, and uh, they were able to make this connection. And Bob Tarter is still alive, so Scott calls his dad and says, Sam Smith is over here, and and Bob Tarter says, Sam Smith played basketball. So, he didn't even realize he was a ball player. So, Sam never really talked about his basketball career. He was just a 6'7" big guy, and so there was this nice reuniting, and Scott and Sam Smith became friends. Really, is what it boiled down to. So, jump back to now when I'm following Scott, and this delay after delay after delay is happening with what seemed like was going to be a nice feel good benefit, for ABA players. Um, and Sam was one of those guys who needed some money at the end of his life because unfortunately he got sick, and he got quite sick to the point where, um, Scott now felt in a way that he hadn't before. He had known other guys who had been sick and passed without a pension, but this was Sam, his friend, and there was just it couldn't have been a more urgent vibe from Scott, and that really is kind of the crux of the story from an emotional point of view because, um, it's a sports story in its surroundings and in its clothing, so to speak.
It's a human
But at the
story.
heart of it, it's a human justice
A
story.
human.
It's about a personal need and urgency and corporate, and perhaps you could call it indifference, certainly tone deafness to the urgency of what was needed, and so uh, and those two things really clash in this film, and so we can go in later to all the value
Yeah,
and important
sure.
things that the ABA did for
Sure.
basketball, but it was a human being who had contributed to the game like Sam Smith, who
Yeah.
needed some help and couldn't get it.
Okay. Wow. Uh, it's funny. We've got questions here, but I got more questions. So
Come on.
I'm filled. I mean, that's my that's my game on basketball. Everything about it. It's been my life. So um, so that's you just kind of this is the conflict. This human. By the way, it's kind of tragic. NBA is multi-billion. Um, so yes, you just said it looks like a basketball story, but it's really a human thing of neglect and corporate greed and all the stuff that's thrown into the pot. So a lot of people, and including myself, and I'm guilty. Of course, I knew Dr. J and I knew the ABA and I knew this stuff, and I followed it, but I had no clue, and you bring this to light uh, what the ABA contributed to the game that we watch today, the NBA. There's so much value, even as a spectator value. That what the ABA. So why don't you talk a little bit about the ABA and
Yeah,
what?
it was one of the Yeah, well, it was one of the things that we had to figure out in the film. Once we started, finished following the story of dropping dimes, trying to get the NBA to kind of come to the table and complete the deal. Once that was done, we had to go back and figure out like how do we tell the story of the ABA? Because um, I mentioned it's from 1967 to 1976. So there's a generational divide, and people about let's say 50 years or older may remember the league just by having seen it on television or at least highlights. Um, they played with you can see over here that's the movie poster. Played with a red, white, and blue basketball. So the league was designed in 1967 to be there. You go, to be fun. Uh, they had to make it distinct from the NBA because most of these ABA owners who started the league, they wanted to be NBA owners, but there just weren't slots. The NBA wasn't a robust league at that point. It was kind of a slow, stale kind of game. If you can believe it or not, in the mid '60s, they were still doing set shots, during games, and so uh, the the ABA came along and said, and importantly, I think, so not only could not a lot of new owners, new franchises come into the league, but not a lot of new players could come in. There were only about 10 NBA teams at that point, and um, there were the league was integrated to a degree. So NBA teams might have had two, three, maybe four players of color, and rarely would those players be on the floor at the same time. So it was considered, there was they thought their audience was white, and they needed to make sure that they pleased that audience. It was just a way of thinking at that time. The ABA came in and said, I don't really care who comes in. We need the best talent available. And so, they had, if the NBA was 70 to 80% white. The ABA was 70 to 80% black. And it was, and there was a change in the style of play that came from the opportunities that black players and there were incredible white players too that came in through the ABA, but the pace of play was increased. The playing above the rim really kind of came from the ABA. The three-point shot was innovated in the ABA. Now
Wow,
it's a defining
sure.
characteristic of the NBA. The slam dunk contest. You mentioned sort of the entertainment value. The entertainment value of ABA play was enormous. It was, they sort of innovated cheerleaders. They innovated halftime shows, um, uh, player fashion. So facial hair. The NBA at that time was much more corporate, and as a matter of speaking. And so the ABA came in and said, yeah, you can wear your bell bottoms. You want to have a huge afro. You want to have facial hair. We don't really care. Show up, play the game, have fun, make it entertaining for our fans. And they did. And so you mentioned Julius Erving. So in New Jersey, many people will remember Dr. J as uh, this just incredible, and he was incredible. I don't think he necessarily gets all the credit that he deserves in terms of how he transformed the game. So for younger audiences, we have to be able to sort of do a backstory. Like, okay, who you know now. Okay, LeBron's aging out of it, but let's say
Is
you
he?
know
Is he aging out?
yes, he is. He is almost immortal. But if you backtrack from LeBron to Kobe to Michael Jordan, and I'm going to be leaving lots of people out, but and Magic Johnson before him, and Larry Bird, and um, those people. Well, less so Bird because he wasn't enough of an athlete, but Dr. J changed the way basketball could look. Um, he was just so long and graceful and an incredible leaper, and just a super talented, unique player. And as Bob Costas describes him in our film, is that you could be in a gym for 2 minutes and that's the guy that your eye would go to because of just the way he moved and the way he played. In the same way that I remember Michael Jordan, there was something different about the way he moved and played. So Dr. J really set that tone, and he was an ABA guy, and so the ABA made all the difference to what the NBA became. As one young man who came to see the film, he's 13 years old, said, I didn't realize that the NBA's origin story is the ABA. And so he really sees it as the origin story, and I think he's right.
Correct. And again, basketball has been my whole life, everything about it, and I never realized that these innovations uh, and came from the ABA. It's wow. I have so much to talk to you about. So, Costas, great, great sports announcer, just fabulous. Just out of curiosity, why does he care so much about the ABA and this film?
Because that's where he started. He
That's very
considers
smart.
himself an ABA guy.
Okay.
His first job really out of college, he went to Syracuse, was calling ABA games in St. Louis for the franchise there, the Spirits
Wow.
of St. Louis. And
Wow.
so for the last 2 years of the ABA, he was there. Um, and there were obviously, anytime if you think back to the first kind of thing you did out of college, it's formative. And so for him, he really he felt like he was a part of those teams, and that's the kind of the one of the fun things about the ABA is that the players and the franchises were really interconnected with their communities. There's a deep love here in Indianapolis for the ABA Pacers, and people define it that way. They'll say, "Oh, I remember the ABA
NBA
Pacers,"
Pacers.
and then the NBA Pacers, which there's also a love affair with. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's just um, there's a distinction, and we screened in Louisville not long ago, and same thing. They had a team there, the Kentucky Colonels, that were champions one year, and um, deep love. People don't forget the kind of taste of the championship honey that the Colonels gave them.
Yeah.
And the Nets in New Jersey, they were the NBA, they were the ABA champions in the final year of the league,
Yeah.
and people remember that. And so, and I think it's interesting to hear you talk about, sort of how much you love basketball, how much it's meant to you. That was really the driving force that got these two guys to start this little charity. this little not-for-profit called the Dropping Dimes Foundation. So one of the founders was Scott Tarter, the lawyer I've talked about. He grew up on the east side of Indianapolis, very blue collar. Obviously, his dad worked at Ford. Didn't see his dad much growing up because his dad always tried to work overtime to have more money. And so the times that they got to spend together were either watching Pacers games on TV together or occasionally going to them. And so it was very, very meaningful to him, the connection that the sports team, the Pacers, brought to he and his dad. It was a time to spend together. And, with men especially, it's like it's a time to be able to share emotion. And it's like, for whatever reason, we're stupid and we don't share emotions otherwise, but during sports we do. And so for him, that was very meaningful. The co-founder of the Dropping Dimes Foundation is a guy named Dr. John Abrams, an eye surgeon here. He's actually the eye surgeon still for the Indiana Pacers.
Wow.
But from 1974 to 1976, he was a ball boy for the ABA Indiana Pacers. And
Wow.
so a deep, deep love affair with the team. Got to know the guys. He would go hang out with the players, pregame and postgame. And, he was probably, 16 at that point. What an incredible experience. And so he loved and still loves the Pacers in a deep, deep way. And so, um, you know, these teams and the teams themselves were very social as well. So they would scratch and claw and fight during a game, but afterwards, they'd all the players and coaches would go out to a bar together. It was just that kind of a
Yeah.
fraternal kind of thing. Um, and then later when the guys were struggling, certain ABA players were the ones ringing the bells. A guy named Mel Daniels was saying, "Hey, our brothers are struggling here. We've got to do something. Something's got to happen." And so, he was really a catalyst for making something happen. He kind of he was a huge guy. He was like 6'11", and
Yeah. That name is
still lived
familiar.
in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Oh, Mel was a heck of a player. I went to basketball camps as a kid where Mel was one of the coaches that would come in, and a voice that was like thunder, and he uh, people still talk about. In fact, we have a little bit about it in the film. The strength of his hands. He would handshake you to death. He could put you down, and so he was a presence. But he was actually a really great guy, and um, he through various circumstances met Dr. John Abrams and Scott Tarter and said, "Guys, we need help. What can you do?" And left it to them to figure out to form a not-for-profit to try and get the guys help.
Quick question. While I'm thinking of it, uh, I guess it's appropriate. Do the current NBA players whose salaries 40, 50, 80, 100 million, are they aware of this? And have they participated in any of this? Is that appropriate for me to ask that?
It is appropriate, and it's a question that once people start to understand the problem, that comes up pretty quickly, because the disparity. Okay, so for context, players in the ABA in the early days, so 1967, 68, they might have been making 25 grand a year. And then by the latter years of the league, 1974, 75, you might have had a few that were making six figures, but that would have been a very high-end
Yeah.
player. And there was no national TV contract, so the league itself wasn't worth much. And the NBA even, it had some minimal TV contracts, but it wasn't rolling in it. And so when the two leagues combined, it was just sort of rating the assets of the ABA, which was dying without the television contract. These were not big money owners; they weren't billionaires, and so they couldn't keep it afloat anymore. couldn't keep the plates spinning, and um, so the NBA brought him on, but the television contracts really started coming in. There was one that came in the late '70s, and there was another one in the early '80s. But then, with Jordan and the Dream Team and some other things that happened, that the popularity just kept growing and growing and growing. And it was in part because the game had changed, the way the ABA had changed it, right? So the
It
game
did.
that Michael Jordan was playing, that was an ABA game. That's part of the reason it became so popular. And Jordan became a pop culture figure because he could express himself in the way he wanted to. And that came out of the ABA. Free agency, which allows the players to negotiate teams against each other, that came out of the ABA merger. And so um, all of these things that came and impacted this magnificent growth for the ABA, for the NBA. ABA created the core value. And um, so when these guys were struggling, and people were saying, well, what these NBA guys that are making tens of millions of dollars, why aren't they helping? Well, that comes up in our film. Um, and, uh, and it's an important moment because uh, to answer your point, maybe it came across radar at a cursory level for these guys, but it didn't seem to sort of. I think if you've known anybody who has a decent amount of wealth, there's a shell or a bubble that kind of comes around them because somebody's always coming and asking for money,
Everybody. Yeah.
always asking for
Yeah.
something.
I know.
And so that's true of NBA players, certainly, these days. And so um, there was, and I don't want to give away too much of the film, but I mean, something happened within the timeline of what was happening to ABA players and guys like Sam Smith um, that pierced the bubble of one of those NBA players and a very important NBA player. And so when that happened, change happened.
I I know. Well, it's funny. That point that you just made. I'm an indie author, and I always have to show what the hell. Um, there's a tortoise in my hair, a journey to spirit. It just got a Kirkus star. I'm compared to John Irving, but a lot of this is me, and there's a chunk of this basketball dreams, hoop dreams, and I could have been a contender, and I was,
Yeah.
yeah, and I remember playing. I went out. I didn't get into Rutgers initially. I went out to uh, Toledo, University of Toledo, 63. Giving away my age, so be it. And I was a pretty good basketball player, but I never played for my high school because I had self-confidence issues, which even hang around with me even today. Heavy duty issues. I didn't know it, but anyway, I went out to Toledo early just to kind of play some ball, and I was playing against a guy named George Patterson. You may or may not know the name. Played for the Pistons. Big guy.
Okay.
Played for the Pistons. He was 6'10", 6'11", and I could jump. I could jump. Maybe they could have made a movie about me. Um, the Woody Harrelson movie. I could
Right.
jump, and I went over the guy, and I jammed it, and I used to wear ankle weights to sleep. I was so crazy, and and
Yeah.
and and a couple of weeks later, a guy came to the room and said, "We want you to play for Toledo." So I could have been a contender. Who the hell knows? My parents wouldn't let me play. The point,
Mm.
the point I was trying to make is trying to promote this. I gave you a whole long-winded story, but it's basketball. But what I've learned and what I'm learning dealing with marketing people and authors and best is you get one, just one out of a whole army celeb, one who takes a liking and they can ignite a fire potentially. That
Sure. Yeah.
that's was a long-winded thing what you just said, Michael. Um,
Yes. Yeah. No, it is a matter of trying to always expose your story to somebody who can make a difference, right?
sure.
As an independent,
Yep.
because you just don't have the bullhorn. And you need somebody to help you amplify. And so he, this particular player was in a unique position to be able to do that.
Right.
And and so, um, yeah, it was pretty. That was one of the more interesting interviews that we did in the piece. So, I mean, we did interview Bob Costas and Julius Erving and Spencer Haywood, who was a transformative figure in terms of player rights, as well as it being a Hall of Fame player itself.
Yeah, wasn't he the
Um,
head of
you
wasn't he
know,
the head of some kind of basketball union or something?
he
Something.
he wasn't he was a member. I don't know if he was the head of the Retired Players Association for a while,
Okay, okay.
but what Spencer's claim to fame in terms of player rights is an enormous one, which is he um, he played for Detroit, the University of Detroit. He grew up in Mississippi. He was a great player. Went to the University of Detroit. I want to say it was a year, maybe it was 2 years, but 1968 he played in the Olympics.
Wow.
Was the best player on the Olympic team, gold medalist. Comes back and he's got no money. So he's been on top of the world, literally. He's got his gold medal around his neck. And he wants to go play basketball professionally, wants to earn some money. And so there were rules then that you couldn't do that. And so he went the ABA again. We'll take anybody. Yeah, come on in. Earn your money. We'll pay you. And so he played in the ABA for a year while taking the NBA to court. And not only did it take him to court, it took him all the way up to the Supreme Court. And there was a Supreme Court decision that says you can't basically stop somebody from earning money, just because you want them to be in college for a few years. So if this guy needs to make money and he's demonstrated hardship, um, then you let him play. And so the Spencer Haywood rule became known as the hardship rule. And so consequently, when you play it forward, this was all 1968, 69, something like that. He, okay, LeBron James came straight out of high school, right? So we know that, excuse me, LeBron makes, let's just say 40 million a year. Probably I'm underestimating that. He got 4 more years because Spencer Haywood let him come in right out of high school.
Yeah,
Kobe Bryant,
right,
4 more years.
right.
An enormous, enormous amount of wealth was created by the fight that Spencer Haywood put on and won.
And I bet you 99.9% of current players have no clue.
No,
No.
no, and again,
Or
that's the bubble that they live in. I mean, you're getting paid 7 figures, maybe 8 figures, and people will say you need to study your history. Some of these guys are 23, 24, sometimes younger.
yeah,
Um, they're trying to sort of figure out how to stay in the league, do better in the league, meet girls, whatever. It's like, it's not something that most players are going to really dive into until some old head comes and says, come with me and let me show you.
okay. Hey, just take a breath a second. I don't want to take a breath. I don't want to waste a second talking to you. But take a breath. I love this question. It's a little, it's cute. It's a one word answer question, but it's nice just to take a break. So here it is. I'm setting it up. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
And Lincoln.
Nice answer. I said George Washington earlier today. You said Lincoln. So great answer. Great answer. And that's a great segue to my next question
Okay.
about segues. So you said Lincoln, and my question, um, the ABA came about, as you were giving me a history lesson, the ABA came about during the 60s, during the civil rights movement. Is there a component of racial stuff to the story that you're telling?
You can't escape it. And it's yes. So stories are all about um, maybe what happens to individuals in a moment, but they always have context as well. And the context, as you mentioned, 1967, that's the height of the civil rights movement, and because opportunity was being created for black, let's call them employees here in the basketball league, um, the civil rights movement was incredibly important to those people. And so Chuck Williams, who's in the film, he was a very good ABA player. He just talks about it was an audacious thing to put this league together at that time and let black players express themselves in the way the league did. It was a little bit fearless. Maybe, some might have called it reckless, but it was something that was happening. Um, we didn't have it in the film, but there were a couple stories about the night that Martin Luther King was killed. The players
Yeah,
were very, very upset,
yeah, yeah.
but the games went on. It wasn't as if they were going to take a day or two away from this because this incredible tragedies unfolded. And so the players had to kind of, stomach that. Um, and, and really the title of the waiting game is not just about the waiting that was happening with Scott Tarter and Sam Smith and the guys in the moment when we were following. It was about this idea that um, power structures um, will often, I think, believe themselves that, hey, we're getting to the right thing. Just give us a minute. We'll get there. You know, with all due respect, please just wait your turn, and we'll figure it out. We want to do the right thing. That's a kind way of looking at it. There are plenty of people who've seen the film and feel like you shouldn't be so kind. Um, Fair enough. Everybody's got a perspective. But when you look at the 60s, you can find archival images of, in civil rights protests. How long must we wait? How long should we wait for our rights? Our right to vote, our right for equality in so many different ways. And so, guys like Malcolm X,
Got
they weren't
time.
going to wait. They were sick
Right.
of waiting. They were,
That's right.
they were going to take action. And so, and if you agreed with that frustration and perspective, you couldn't blame them. And so, the waiting game is about largely black players now at the end of life, struggling, still being told, "Wait, it's coming." And so that theme is pretty strong throughout.
Funny, you were just talking about um, waiting, and I came out of the '60s, and I was very active in civil rights, even to this day, and I'm very proud of. I mean, I didn't change the world at all, but at least it was a consciousness and awareness. Hey, one of my best days ever was meeting John Lewis,
Mm.
telling him a little bit of my journey, and he takes my hands because he was moved by my journey. Forget what I thought about John Lewis, and he held my hands and he squeezed my hands, and somebody took a picture of that, and it's just
Ah, nice.
one of the greatest. But you're talking about waiting, Malcolm X and stuff. One of my heroes coming out of the '60s, certainly as an adult today, is most people don't know who she is. Fannie Lou Hamer was a civil rights activist in the mid later '60s, and she said from down south. She said one of the greatest things ever, which deals with waiting. And she said, and it's one of my, and I read about it in my book. She said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired."
Uh,
Brilliant,
right.
brilliant, and that's what you're saying. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Well, I mean, one of the other people that is, more than worth mentioning and that appears in the film, for me, it was a very important get in terms of booking an interview, is Dr. Harry Edwards. And so Harry Edwards is a professor emeritus at UC Berkeley and San Jose State University. Um, but he is the inventor of sports sociology. The idea that sports is its own almost anthropological sphere, and that social development and cultural development can come uniquely out of sport, because people care so much about it and invest so much in it. You can't ignore it as a sociological factor. And but when Harry was in college, um, he um, he was in the protest movement in the Bay Area, and he was teammates with Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who are now known iconically
I
for
write
the
them.
photo.
They're in my
Okay, there
book
you go.
too.
The
They're in my book
1968
too.
Olympic
Mexico
medalist
City.
in Mexico City. They hold up a
Yep.
Black Power fist.
Yep.
Um, the guy who had the idea for that was Harry Edwards,
Wow.
and so he, in fact, he wanted more. He wanted a boycott, but they said, no, we're going to go run, but will at least do this. And so they did. And it's obviously iconic. And but Harry's got just a way of framing and encapsulating issues that need to be addressed. He's not at all fearful to ever do that. And so he talks, about these racial components and just justice components, human dignity. He's very, very important in the film, um, because he takes it beyond basketball, and that was huge for us.
Life. Boy, would I like to meet him someday. Uh, iconic. And I never knew that he was behind, uh, Smith and Carlos there. That was that to me, that was such a stunning, uh, memorable thing that they did, and I was so supportive of that. Anyway, um, so uh, the first half of the film, it would appear that it's purely investigative. And then the second half, it kind of becomes like cinema verite, by
That's
design.
exactly right.
Huh?
Yes. Yeah. So we tease that we're in the moment with the Dropping Dimes guys early, and we are, but you have to know all this context that we've been talking about. As we were sort of trying to unfold the film, it's like, okay, what is the ABA? Who are these guys that need help? Do we care about them at all? Do we care about this league? Yes, we do, over the course of a little bit of storytelling, and then okay, how'd they wind up this way? Well, that's the business deal. Let's go back and look at the business deal, because the lawyer is looking at the business deal and saying it does look like they should have benefits. Why don't they have benefits? How come the NBA doesn't know their own legal responsibility here? And so the first, close to an hour of the film um, is all of that, and getting to know the Bob Costa, and some fun too, right? So the ABA was a fun league, and there's some fun moments in there about just enjoying the game of basketball and watching it grow and listening to these guys tell stories. But it's once um, once Sam Smith gets you get to know Sam a little bit, and understand what's happening with he and Scott Tarter, and like the Dropping Dimes Foundation is now becoming sort of a really personal vehicle for Scott. Um, then we were with him and the foundation all the way through, and then we get to a point where I know the NBA has been saying for a while they're going to get there, they're going to get there, they're going to get there. It really seems like they're going to get there, and so there were three guys that did Dropping Dimes. The two I've mentioned, John Abrams and Scott Tarter, and a third board member, Ted Green. And, they're sitting in a conference room waiting, ironically enough, that word again, um, for what is supposed to be an announcement that comes at a certain time, and it doesn't come. And then, literally, now the clock is ticking. It's the half an hour past when they said it would be done, and what they're waiting for is a vote from the board of governors, essentially the owners of the NBA to get something done, and then more time and more time, and we sit there and we wait with them, and so we are a fly on the wall, so to speak, watching this unfold, and what comes out of them during that wait, knowing that they've been working on this for years, is it was a really interesting night. I will just say that.
So the film profiles something called impact journalism. Why is that important?
Well, because journalism has taken on some sort of rotten auras over the course of the last 10 years or so. Um, and I'm not necessarily just a believer in that. You can find a little rottenness in any industry, and what's happened is that it's been amplified for political means, honestly, and so there's a lot of distrust in journalism, and but I've known journalists my entire career, and I can't think of one of them who isn't sort of honor bound to tell the truth, as they see it. And so, this, um, so the impact of journalism, if I don't know if you ever caught the documentary Athlete A, right? So there's
Oh, I sure
journalism
have.
that uncovered the scandal inside USA
Michigan
Gymnastics.
State. Yeah.
Tons and tons of stories where if it not for a journalist
By the way, that was
taking
your
the time
hometown
to
newspaper,
dig,
right? Was
it
that?
actually is, yes, yeah.
Yeah, see, I know that. Yeah, sure.
Um, but there, you can find it in any city. The good journalists doing good work make a critical difference into how we live our lives and our awareness of things. That happened with this story. There was a journalist for the Indianapolis Star, Dana Benbow, who she started following the story. Dropping Dimes was found, I want to say, in 2015. I could be off by a year, but nobody knew anything that was going on. And she heard about a former Indiana Pacer player, a guy named Charlie Jordan, who, and again, the Dropping Dimes Foundation was started. I think if I got the numbers right, $2,500 from Scott Tarter, $2,500 from John Abrams, 5,000 bucks into the pot, and we're just going to try and help guys as best we can. So one of the first requests they get is from Charlie Jordan, who wants nothing more than a suit. 6'9" guy wants a suit to go to church. He can't afford it, and he feels bad going to church. And so Dana heard about that. Hey, this little whatever this is, Dropping Dimes is going to buy a suit for Charlie Jordan to go to church. She went down, covered it, took pictures, and uh, it was incredibly meaningful to Charlie, and but just the first step in what would be some really really significant things, because the next requests that came were for dental work. Somebody was living in incredible pain. A former player needed a lot of dental work, and they got a dentist to come in and help. And Abrams is an eye doctor, so when they needed medical consultation, he would often give them that. Um, you know, Saving people from eviction, all sorts of things. And so the stories, Dana kept following it. She thought it was a one-off. She thought it was like, okay, guy getting the suit's a nice feel-good story. But it just kept going. And so, as she says in the film, she didn't expect to be following it for 7 or 8 years. We really just kind of come in the last year and watch it unfold. But she was there the whole time. And her stories, she writes for the Indianapolis Star, and that is a Gannett paper. And so Gannett owns USA Today as well. So some of her stories, including one of the last ones, um, elevated to the national paper. And when they did, they went viral. And that is was impact journalism, because the people that it hit, once it hit a national scale, um, you were talking about, you just need one, right? You just need that one person who can make a difference. really, Dana's story was the one until it hit the player who could make a difference, and then change happens.
Um, I suspect as this film gains inertia that it may speed things up a bit.
I hope so. That's a hope for it, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
Because again, not to sort of give away um, the ending, but it's safe to say there's work to be done.
Of course.
Um, and so I don't think there's enough awareness of work that needs to be done, and it is an entirely solvable problem. This is not, boy, we need to rebuild the Great Wall of China with spoons. It's not that. It's this could be solved in a week,
That
um,
sure, sure.
and so it's just a matter of the right people seeing it,
Yeah.
and a matter of will, awareness and will.
Great way to finish this segment. What you just said, powerful stuff. Um, with your blessing. Oh, by the way, well, I'll make my final. But can we just do a few really off-topic things, basketball related?
Let's go.
With just off topic. But anyway, what you've done for me, I call myself a journalist. I've been putzing around doing journalism stuff for 14 years. I wasn't trained as a journalist. I wasn't trained as a writer. I wrote a novel or two novels.
You're doing it.
I mean, I didn't know. I sold eyeglasses for 25 years. So I think I mentioned that to you. I worked for the richest Italian in the world for 25 years, so I learned a lot of stuff. It's all up here,
Yeah.
people skills
Hmm.
and stuff. But anyway, some off topic things about basketball. Because by the way, I'm officially welcoming you to come back right on camera here. You can come back in any shape, way, form, panels, talks. I sit
And
here and I've probably done about 10 different basketball stories uh, um, over the 4 years that I've been doing this channel. So you can come back in any time, any shape, way, form. I sit in this chair, especially, and there's no basketball being played. I don't know what the hell to do with myself. Uh, so I go ahead and I watch some old. It's funny, we're going to talk about that. I watch, I'm not embarrassed to say this, Hoosiers once a month, the movie,
no, no kidding.
once a month.
Yes.
And as I began,
For fun, okay, we got to come back to Hoosiers for a second.
yes,
So
I want to talk
in
about it.
Indiana, the the
Milan,
gym
Milan
where
High.
they played.
Oh,
Well, no, that was the high school, the real high school.
right.
But the gym where it's all filmed is in a little town called Knightstown. It's about an hour from Indianapolis.
Huh?
I so want to take the film and screen it in that gym.
Oh, wow. That would be great.
It
That
would be
would
so
be
fun.
great. So that's Hickory's Gym.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's Hickory's Gym. It's funny, there's a festival that goes on here in New Jersey um, um, once a year, and they bring in it was a horror it was a horror festival, and they branched out and they bring in all kinds of celebrities, major celebrities to come to the festival. But I looked this year at who's coming the end of April, and Maris Valenius is coming, Jimmy Chitwood. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so he was a one-shot deal. I mean, I literally watched that movie, and when I first saw it, and then a couple more times, when I got it on DVD, I investigated, and I found that it's a true story,
Hmm.
and I found it on YouTube, the actual game that Milan was playing. Maybe it was South Bend, I don't know.
No, Muncie Central.
Okay. And the guy who's still around, his name is Bobby Plump.
Yep.
Jimmy. So I know my stuff.
Yes, I've met Bobby.
Yeah. Oh wow. And he's pretty sharp, and he made that last shot just like Jimmy Chitwood did. It's a remarkable movie.
I'm not sure they were running the old picket fence though. Uh, yeah. But yes, in fact, it's funny you mentioned it because it just popped up on my Facebook feed. That shot, and yeah, it's actually pretty good footage.
It is. The footage I saw was really, as a matter of fact, when I watched it originally, and I watched it a year or two ago again, and the level of play for the early 50s was rather sophisticated.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
it was a clear out, right?
yeah,
Everybody's over to one side of the court, and it's just
yep,
Jimmy Chitwood slash Bobby Plump
sure.
and a defender.
Yep. Uh, just and I take film to a little bit of a higher level. I look at the production of that movie, the storyline, of course, the production, the mood that it puts you in, and everything about it's above and beyond. It's above and beyond just a sports movie. It's human, relationships, and Gene Hackman, who I loved.
Yeah,
Uh,
he
uh,
was he was one of my favorite actors of
Yep,
all time.
just marvelous. And there were times in my recent journalism career, if I had the guts, I would have tried to contact him, and I would have flown down to New Mexico just to, interview him for 5 or 10 minutes. It would have been worth the trip.
Yeah.
So that's Hoosiers. Another quick question, and this kind of ties into some of the things you've been talking about, and it does, and it's current events. I saw this yesterday. The Celtics got sold for 6.5 billion, the highest price ever paid for a sports team.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of money
Yeah.
floating around in those.
And good for them, right? So I mean, I'm not a person who thinks that that's necessarily wrong. If you've got
Not at all.
an entertainment product that can get you that, good. Like more power to you.
More power to
I
you.
think just be, I hope, maintain your humanity,
Yeah.
and understand that um, it wasn't just you that built the franchise. It was generations of fans and a whole bunch of players. And it's we make the point in the film, but I don't think it's revolutionary. It's akin to factory workers. You'll all sorts of stories of factory workers who built value in a company, and then the company gets sold or acquired, and they're not really represented at the table at the where those final negotiations are happening, and so they don't really reap the benefits in any major way. Sometimes they do, but often they don't, and so that's what the ABA players kind of became. They became the factory workers who built modern basketball, and they're not seeing a nickel from the Celtics. Um,
Yeah.
so um,
Yeah.
and
Coincidentally, Michael, on one of the streaming services, I forget, I've got a few of them, but I've been watching, I guess maybe it was HBO, the
either HBO or Hulu, I can't remember.
Celtics.
Yes.
Uh, I mean, of course, it was a great learning experience, and I was a Celtic fan. I was legitimately a Celtic fan as a kid.
I was I grew up in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is where Larry Bird played basketball in college, and so when he went to the Celtics, I became a Celtics fan.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So, and I mean, I learned a
yeah, I was
lot.
there for years.
Great coach, Red Auerbach, and the rules, and Bill Russell, who I marvel at Bill Russell in as a man, and the things he's done, and how eloquent he was above and beyond, and how really great he was.
Well, again, one of those really just iconic figures of a moment, right? So, Russell was this towering black man in a largely white sport, and nobody wiser than him as to all that was going on. And so he's actually quoted in our film
Oh,
that Harry Edwards quotes Bill Russell as saying, we talked about how many blacks there were on a team in the NBA in the early days of when the ABA was competing against them. It was like, well, the Russell said, I don't know exactly how many you're supposed to play, but I can tell you what the basic idea is, which is the tradition is you play two at home, two blacks at home, three if you're on the road, five if you got them when you get behind.
That's
And
great.
yeah, I mean, probably it's a little bit funny, but it's also a little bit true.
Well, uh, uh, by the way, we can go on and on. I'm going to stop because we could go
Yeah.
on for hours. It's endless. You are amazing. The waiting
Thank you.
game is so important because, by the way, I think this carries over to lots of things about our lives and caring and awareness and everything. So, and again, I'll say it again, come back any shape, way, form, above and beyond. Uh, um, I keep growing this channel and you've been so gracious and I thank you so much and such good luck with this because it really is
Thank you.
so important. It is so important.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time and the ability to talk about it, and
Yeah.
I hope people will come see it at the Garden State Film Festival and in other screenings. We do have, we've got I mentioned a Facebook page, which is the Waiting Game Movie
Sure.
on Facebook and Instagram, and then we're website, the waitinggamemovie.com, and we'll put community screenings in because that's one of the ways we're getting it out
Please
there. Is just
do. And by the way, whatever I can do, I'm certainly not, uh, Sporting Times or Sports Illustrated or anything, but whatever I can do as I have a growing audience, I'm happy to spread the word.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So
Early.
people can hopefully see it, and and again amplify, and you just don't know who will hear. Word of mouth is such a vital way to get these
Yep,
things out,
yep,
and so
yep.
I hope people see it because I do think
Yeah.
it's important.
It's very important. Again, above and beyond, it's so important in our crazy world that we live in. This is important. Thank you, Michael. Don't leave. I'm just going to stop recording. We'll do a 2-minute wrap. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Just hold up my waiting game. Um, and here we go.